let's talk about complaining. So last night, a friend of mine made a post on YouTube, Authentically Raylan. I'll tag her channel in the description, and it really was just talking about like how sometimes God says no to our prayers, and that we really shouldn't complain because at least God answers our prayers and He knows our name. And her and I were having a dialogue. It was a really good conversation. And before I had went to sleep last night, I had saved a sermon from John MacArthur about stop complaining. And this morning I woke up around 1:45, and as I had been doing all week, so throughout the day I'm like tired. And when I wake up, I was like, why is it so early? And I'm just angry. Anyway, I'll get to that in a second. The verses that he pointed out was Philippians chapter 2, verses 12 through 14. And I'll go ahead and read them and give you some of the gist, and then I'll tell you what I was thinking that made me share this video. Therefore, my beloved, as you have always obeyed, not as in my presence only, but now much more in my absence, work out your own salvation with fear and trembling. For it is God who works in you both to will and to do for his good pleasure. Do all things without complaining and disputing. So as we are doing what we feel the Lord leads us to do, calls us to do, we really shouldn't be complaining. So just complaining is really just an emotional, why is this happening? And it's, like how much of it is godly lament, because even David lamented, and how much of it is really just being discontent with what you have, where you are, and where God has placed you. If you really believe that God has placed you there, you really shouldn't be complaining so much. And disputing is really more of an intellectual debate, like you can do this better. Well, why do you do it this way? Isn't this not, like, this is not what I wanted? Like, can you do better? Can you really do better? I don't think so. I've been walking with the Lord for several decades at this point, and his word has never failed me ever. I've complained a lot. He's corrected me a lot. He's taught me a lot of things. He's grown my faith so much from the different things that's happened to me in my life. I don't believe anybody has a squeaky clean testimony. I think a lot of people think that I do, but I don't. I don't have a squeaky clean testimony, and I've been through things, and the Lord has allowed me to face my consequences of my own actions, and has put me through fire with, things I cannot control. And all of it, I come to the same conclusion. It was all for my good. It was for the strengthening of my faith. This is what James tells us. This is what Romans says. All things work together for the good of those who love the Lord. And let's really talk about suffering. So, not every situation is going to work out to be good for us. But as far as like our external stuff, but as far as internal spiritual, every test that we go through, every suffering that we go through, every trial that we go through is to deepening our faith, is to get us to pray more and learn how to pray, learn how to rely on God fully. So anyway, so as we're going through things in life, we're promised that there will be suffering. We're promised that the world hated Jesus and is going to hate us too. We're promised that there will be hard times. It will rain on the just and the unjust. So it's not just us as believers that's going to go through hard times. Unbelievers are going to go through hard times as well. So we're promised life will happen. Life will always be lifing, right? How we go about life as a believer should be different than how an unbeliever goes throughout life. And as a believer, we're called to not complain. So verse 12, work out your own salvation with fear and trembling. 13 says that God will do this, right? So he will allow things to happen. Either we face our consequences of our actions, or he will allow things to happen to refine us. Things that we can't control. Like I couldn't control Katrina, right? But I could control overspending, which almost put my husband and I in a broke house when we first got married, right? So consequences of our actions, God will allow us to suffer through sometimes. And sometimes he rescues us from that. And things that we can't control, That's God's will for our journey, right? And so if we believe that we're doing God's will, if we're obeying Him and things are happening, if we're basically doing what we believe God is calling us to do, then we should do those things without griping about it. We should be happy to do those things. And we shouldn't be thinking that we can do it better or whatever, because that's just simply not true. Anyway, so that's what the sermon was essentially about. The part that he connected that gripped me was the fact that he kind of tied in the Israelites. They would pray to God to save them from Pharaoh and their harsh labor and whatever else. And God did. And then 3 days later, they were complaining about, oh, we're trapped. We should have just died in Egypt, blah, blah, blah. And God saved them from the Red, he parted the Red Sea. And then he drowned the Egyptians that were chasing after them. And they celebrated. And then immediately after, they were like, what are we going to eat? Oh my gosh, we should have just stayed in. Like, they just kept complaining. And then God saved them again. And they kept complaining. When my husband and I was reading through Genesis, it was just so nearly unbearable, because like, how many times does God have to rescue them for them to not complain? So I'm sitting here up. It's now 5:12, and I've been up since 1:45, and I complained about waking up. But then I remembered I've been praying to God to wake up earlier again at 4:30. Right? That I used to wake up at 4:30, and oh my gosh, my days were productive. I wasn't overly tired. I had a better attitude throughout the day. I got more things done. I got my quiet time in to help reset my mind. I was like, am I being an Israelite? Because I prayed for waking up early, and then I'm complaining that I'm waking up early. I am. I'm being an Israelite. So that was kind of jarring. That was not fun to feel. How can you pray for something and then get mad that what you're praying for is being answered because it's not how you expected it to? So that was very humbling. I have lots of those moments. But anyway, I came really on here to share that thing. If you're doing the will of God, if you're living your life according to what God has said, don't complain about it. If you're praying for something and God grants it, don't complain about it, because it's not the way that you expect it to happen. If you pray about something and it doesn't happen, stop complaining about it, because ultimately that wasn't God's will for your life, and it's obviously best that you didn't get it. So it's very easy to complain, especially when you have other complainers around you. You have to be very vigilant with what you say, think, and do, right? You have to be on alert. You have to make sure that you're taking these thoughts captive and you're making them obey Christ, what God has said, and then taking that thought to focus on things that are praiseworthy. Complaining is not praiseworthy. God does not like complaining. He's killed people for grumbling in the Old Testament. Thank the Lord for His grace and mercy. But we have to take our thoughts into captivity. We have to allow God's work to be done God's work will be done whether we allow it or not, because God is God. But so when I say allow, I'm not saying God gets our permission. That is not how that works. And saying allow is a lack for a better word to use. But we have to let the work of God be done in our life without complaining and disputing it, and know that He knows best. As a homemaker, there's a lot of things that we can complain about, but I challenge you, just as John MacArthur in that sermon challenged me, to not complain today. And if you find yourself wanting to complain, breathe and pray about it, and then let it go. Keep that in your mind. Keep Lamentations chapter 3 verse 39 says, this is the NLT, then why should we mere humans complain when we are punished for our sins? We can't do right, and yet we have a nerve to complain to a God about a God that is perfect, who does all things right. So don't complain.